two questions actually that
Mm.
like I just wanted to ask you as we've been going through things. One is the influence of European so in particularly with swords, what I've done very minimal research, but like only the little research I did was basically the subcontinent is absolutely full to the brim of different swords and knives and daggers and whatever, bladed weapons. And the influence of Europe is essentially just this Ferengi sword. And I just find it funny it's even called that, because it's almost like an insult, because it's almost like, oh, it's a Ferengi blade. We don't like, as in keep it away. However, on the flip side, when you look at things like Runjeet Singh's rule, it's very much kind of made apparent that it was European discipline, especially in relation to the army, that helped kind of elevate things to a new level. Would it then be fair to say that European weaponry, especially when it comes to bladed weapons, was just not up to the same standard as what you were finding in India at the time, and hence why there just wasn't the same kind of impact? Because if you look at like, and again, I'm only using this because I did a podcast with Priya Atwell the other day and I had to read up about the Sikh Empire, but like it almost seems like the Sikh Empire was influenced by European discipline when it came to military, but that was it.
In regards to your Ferengi comment, I wonder if the word Ferengi has become kind of slightly derogatory later, because certainly there's in Gurbani, Ferengi, the word Ferengi appears in not a derogatory way. There's a Shabad, isn't there, that says Bang se Bengali, Farang se Ferengi, Dilli ke Dilwali. So I don't know if Ferengi was an insult. I know certainly about European blades, Ferengi blades, that they were bought in large quantities. It's said because the Indians liked the exoticness of them, but I wonder if there was also some propaganda, as in with the British breaking the thumbs of the weavers in India and banning Indian textiles and making them buy English textiles. I wonder if there is some propaganda like, "Oh, your steel is crap," buy our superior Ferengi blades.
I see. Yeah.
I mean, there's just a kind of a loose theory. No, the Indian blades were not inferior in any way. The Indians had developed crucible steel, Wootz Damascus steel, centuries before centuries before Europe were able to do so, and that, of course, is a superior steel. So yeah, it didn't make sense to kind of swap out a Wootz blade, a Foulard Damascus blade, Damascus being the kind of the most commonly known, probably the most inaccurate, but anyway, the most common word. For a Ferengi blade, it kind of didn't make sense.
So it's more to do with the quality of the blade itself rather than the shape of the blade or anything. That is the kind of the pinnacle or kind of the deciding factor. Because like the only reason I mention this is because even with some of the early European accounts, when they go to, for argument's sake, the armory that Runjeet Singh has, the British are writing back going, the cannons that these guys have are far superior to anything that we've seen. We need to take one of these and revert, just like you were saying about Tipu's rockets. They say the same thing, which is we need to take this back and reverse engineer it. And I just find it interesting that when it comes to certain aspects, so for argument's sake, military discipline, like Runjeet Singh's employing all of these Europeans to bring in this new form of discipline, European military discipline. But yet, when it comes to stuff like cannons, rockets, and weapons, it seems to be the flip side, where the Europeans seem to be wanting to figure out how the Indians are doing things. Yeah. So I'm assuming then it's a similar thing when it comes to bladed weapons and armor and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a tough question. They know that the Europeans never really adopted Indian weapon design, shall we say, shapes perhaps. I can think of a really good Indonesian example of when the Dutch were fighting in Indonesia in the jungles. Their straight blades and their bayonets were no good cutting through branches and trees and getting through the forests. So they took the Indonesian kluang sword, and so the Dutch in their army pattern swords have got Indonesian swords.
No, definitely. This is a question I always like to ask collectors, but like, what is your favorite item? And it doesn't have to be something that you currently own, because I think from the way that you've been saying you're a temporary custodian, I'm assuming you've owned some really awesome things that have then kind of passed through your hands. Like, as in, do you have like a top 3 or a top 5, like, or just a few that you want to mention?
I normally, I think for my own sanity, once I've sold something, I try and forget about it, because otherwise I'll be mourning like it was a lost lover. So I knew you were going to ask me this question. So what I've done, I've taken an object from my current inventory, but actually trying to not be biased here, it is the most exciting and interesting object I've ever found. I'm going to take my ring off and my gudar as well. Controversial taking my gudar. That's right, it's right here. I'm going to put a glove on. And my hand will reappear shortly.
You're not about to just break out into a Michael Jackson. No?
Yeah, I might have some white socks and black loafers on under the desk. Sequined socks, right? No. So here it is.
Oh, wow.
So this is a bagnakh.
Sorry, I've just got one on my shelf, which is a modern reproduction, which looks absolutely nothing like it. I just want to get it for comparison.
Yeah, no, please. That'd be good to show. Yeah, fully articulated, as you can see, so it moves with the hand.
So I absolutely love the fact that it's one of them, because, like, so I've got a more modern one, which, as you can see, we literally sent, there's an engineer in Birmingham who, like, family friends, I literally sent him a photo and was like, can you make one from the photo? And they just took a print of our hand and whatever and made it from that. Obviously, very basic, looks nothing like the one that you've got.
Yeah, but don't be disheartened, because the one I have is it's one of a kind. Of the first time I've ever, well, it's technically not the first time I've seen it, but it's the only one known in existence. It's one of a pair. Anyway, I'm trying to confuse everybody. Let me be very clear. So I'm going to take it off while I talk. So the story is, when I first started collecting, I bought a book. And the book was called Indian and Oriental Arms and Armour, I think, by Lord Egerton of Tatton. And it was a catalogue of the India Museum, what was the India Museum. And I would, with my £50 sword next to me, I would flick through this book thinking, wow, I would love this, I would love this. They were all hand-drawn. This book was published in 1890 or something.
Oh, so it wasn't photographs of them;
no.
It was literally drawings of the items. Okay.
They were very good hand drawn, but there were double page spreads, and there was a page for the Sikhs, there was a page for the Gurkhas from Nepal, there was a Gurkha Marathan weapons, so there was double page spread out, and under the Maratha objects, the Marathas were a very important empire in India, and they covered at one point in the 1800s, they covered nearly the whole of India. And on the Maratha page was a line drawing of one of the ones I've just held up. And of course, I'd seen bagnakhs like you're showing me, which is what most people think when they say bagnakh.
Just a basic, to
be concealed in the hand. And for those who don't know, bagnakh, bag leopard, nakh meaning claw, so leopard claw. Anyway, I saw a line drawing of this, and I just thought, wow, and the image stuck in my mind, and I never thought, well, I never did see one. I just never. Really
I've never ever seen one like that ever.
And in 2012, Robert Hales, quite a prominent dealer, kind of a semi-retired dealer anyway now, published a book of his kind of things he'd found over his career, and in there was one of these that I've just shown you. I think I may have talked to him at one point, and he told me, you know, he bought it and they sold it to a Ukrainian museum. I thought, okay. And as I said, it's an image that stuck in my mind always. And I thought, well, that was the one from the book. And then last year, I'm not going to go into the details for the sake of secrets and keeping business secrets, but last year I was offered this one from another dealer in Europe, and it was a lot of money, but I didn't negotiate too hard. I bought it, and I thought, well, it must be the same one as the one that was published in the Hales book and the one that was in the 1890s book. And I started to compare, and mine is the right hand, and the one in the Hales book is the left hand, and the one in the book from the 1890s was the right hand. So the one in the line drawing from 1890 is the one I probably have, but because it's a line drawing, we can't say for certain that it's the one I have. Maybe it was drawn, you know, in a reverse. Maybe there was more than one pair made. You know, we know there are a pair now because I have the right and the left is in Ukraine. And I hope it's safe and sound in Ukraine. Last I heard, the area that's been affected by the war is not where the object museum is. So as far as we know, there's only one pair, but, you know, who's to say there wasn't more than one pair made and they were destroyed, lost, you know, whatever. The kind of scandal came when I was doing the research for this object. And whenever I'm doing research for any complex object, the photograph goes off to, you know, people I trust, 3 or 4 academics and what have you. The photograph was forwarded without my knowledge to somebody, and the accusation was made, well, if this is the one from the book in 1890, the book in 1890 is the catalogue of the India Museum, which then became the V&A Museum. So that should be in the V&A Museum. What are you doing with it? And, you know, panic immediately, alarm bells going off in my head. And I got back in touch with the dealer I bought it from, you know, tried to hammer down its provenance. Couldn't really get, there was a lot of hearsay. It came from a Swiss collection, it came from a Paris auction. Couldn't really get too much information. And then I thought, I'm going to have to speak to the V&A Museum before I do anything else. And so I spoke to Susan Strong, who, as always, is very, very kind and gave me her time. And we researched the one from the Egerton book, and we looked at the records that the V&A keep. And the line drawing example was the one from the V&A Museum, or should be in the V&A Museum, but the records say it was written off in 1950. And I said to Susan Strong, you know, what does written off mean? And she said, well, the curator at the time was a pacifist. So he could have sold it, he could have given it away. We just don't know.
Hold on. Sorry.
No,
Hold on. That story is insane. But the bit that caught me is the fact that the curator at the time was a pacifist.
Yeah, apparently.
So may have sold it or taken. That is probably one of the most, not shocking, but it's just insane how someone's very personal belief can impact something so kind of material. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
No, it's okay. Well, yeah, it is shocking, but at the same time, you must realize, and maybe people don't realize this, museums do sell objects.
No, that bit I understand. As in, I'm aware of that. It's more so the fact of the reasoning behind it. As in,
I mean, it's purely hearsay, of course. We don't know that. Reason,
because it's almost like saying, well, in that case, how about we tear down all of the British castles because they're built as a form of defense? As in, I just find the logic very very interesting. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure with any field, curatorial work has come a long way since then. You know, I'm sure that would like to think that wouldn't happen now, but so it was, and you know, the comment was, well, even if we thought that the one you have was ours, and maybe there was a line that it had been stolen or something, we can't say that yours is ours because we only have a line drawing. They don't have a photograph. And so we can't say for sure that it's the one on the same object. So in conclusion, it's with me and I'm very happy. I was getting ready to get lawyered up, this is like Game of Thrones sometimes. And I had to deal with the leak, by the way. But yeah, I was getting ready to get lawyered up against the V&A because, my question would have been, okay, I didn't steal it, and the person I bought it from didn't steal it. Maybe it was stolen in the 1950s, but where did the V&A get it from? And I did ask that question, and they don't have the records. But if you're asking me to prove where I got it from, or where the person that got it from, I got it from, where did he get it from? Where did you get it from? Is the question. So let's put the onus on you instead of putting the onus on me. But I'm very happy to say
it all worked out.
Yeah.
No, nice. So, what is the history of this piece then?
The most famous story of a bagnakh being used was a man called Shivaji. And for those who study Indian history and maybe military history, they'll know who he was. He was the first king of the Maratha Empire. And Shivaji, being a very clever military leader and a great man who's revered in India by the Maratha community, did his research on Afzal Khan, of course, and found that Afzal Khan had agreed to do a parley with another king, and instead attacked and imprisoned him during the parley. So Shivaji went into that parley with body armor under his clothes, because the agreement of the parley was that no weapons will be taken in. And in his hand, one account I've heard under his glove was wearing a bagnakh. And in this parley, he killed Afzal Khan. Instead, Afzal Khan attacked him, and he killed him with using the bagnakh and the bichua. So that story is quite a famous story, and it kind of really, I'm sure at the time, sent a message to the Mughals and immortalized Shivaji. So that's the most famous story of the bagnakh. The one I have and the matching one to it in the Ukrainian museum are the best known in existence. So whether they were made for him, Shivaji, is pure speculation, of course. Whether they were made in celebration of the act or what he did, I just don't know.
Nice. And do you know, like, the area or the time frame from when, like, as in, have you managed to date or kind of geographically locate where the bagnakh you have and the one in the Ukrainian museum is from?
It's difficult to date, but I've kind of said a conservative late 18th century in terms of the workmanship, the style, and the one in the Ukrainian museum has the inscription, has a small inscription saying Satara, the anglicized spelling would be Satara, but that's all we know. So we don't know any more than that. So it's really difficult to have any more information about it. But regardless of how it looks visually and the rarity, it's really a feat of engineering. It's fully articulated, so you can move your hand completely.
No, awesome. Just on that last comment, then, the fact that it's articulated to your hand, and how you were saying how swords in India were not normally, but sometimes made like almost with the patron in mind in terms of height, this and that. Would it have been a similar thing with this, which it probably would have been kind of molded to someone's hand, as in it would have been made specifically for one person?
Yeah, I would have thought so, without a doubt. Yeah. It's such an important thing. I don't think you would make
Lots of them.
Yeah, you wouldn't make lots of them. You wouldn't make such a complex, important object on a whim, hoping that you're going to
Yes.
find a client. You would
Yeah,
make
yeah,
it
yeah.
with somebody in mind. Yeah.
No, definitely. So, one question which I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are probably waiting for me to ask, especially considering the breadth of time you spent in this field and also kind of the different items, arms, armor, non-arms and armor as well, in terms of art that you said you've collected or had the temporary custodianship of. How do you figure out what's legit? I know earlier on you spoke about how once you've seen lots of stuff, once you've held it, once you've kind of, I don't know, seen like 10,000 pieces of art, you kind of pick up certain telltale signs. Like, what are they? How do you go about kind of sanity checking what you're getting? And is there a process, or have you perhaps been kind of bitten before by something that you thought was legit and then turns out isn't, or like, yeah, how does all of that work?
I don't think there's any shortcuts. There are definitely things I can tell you to look out for certain objects. But it's really difficult. There's no shortcuts. You just need to. Jade handled daggers are a classic example. Probably the most faked thing, because when it's real, it's worth a lot of money. And they were made in good enough numbers for them to come up in auctions fairly regularly. Pretty bog standard Mughal jade dagger is going to be 8,000 as a bog standard one. You can see why the fakers want to fake them. And there's really no shortcuts. It really is handling, seeing lots of real ones and studying them carefully, looking at the color of jade being used. In fact, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I wouldn't want the fakers do make mistakes, which I can spot. And I don't want to tell them, I've kind of just given one away. So I can't imagine the fakers are going to be listening to this podcast, but I've kind of just let one slip there. But there are several telltale signs that give it away. There's no shortcuts. If somebody's listened to this and they want me to come up with a few phrases or bits of knowledge, then even if I was to do that, without showing you seeing it, it's very difficult. I talked about the color of jade. How do I describe that on a podcast? It's almost impossible. In saying that, I think I'm happy to share that information with somebody who's looking to buy something. I would definitely share that information with them. And I mean, the other thing is, the advantage I have is that I've been doing it for 20 years, and this is all I do now. Whereas collectors don't always, and this is why collectors use dealers. They don't have the advantage of having, 8 hours a day to dedicate to researching, to trawling through books and libraries and museums and auctions. So that's the service I offer, and other dealers offer. That yes, there is a monetary investment. I buy something, I need to get my money back and hopefully a small profit. But also there's the service I'm providing, I'm doing all that legwork for you. I made mistakes so my clients don't have to make that mistake. That's one thing my clients can take away.
That answer has brought me on brilliantly to the next question, which is for collectors or those who are listening to this who have just started out or are interested in starting out, what would you say is the best place to start? What are some of the mistakes to avoid? Do you have any advice per se in kind of entering this field?
I said one already, don't buy in India. And then secondly, find an advisor, a dealer, preferably a dealer. Auction houses can be good. The right auction house can be good, but they're not infallible.
They're not. I've seen a lot of mistakes on some of the biggest auction houses you can name. So yeah, you're right there.
And the non-arms and armor auction houses are don't have arms and armor specialists. The arms and armor auctions, of course, they are specialists, but are they specialists of Indian? If you're collecting Indian arms and armor, are they specialists of Indian arms and armor? Probably not. I can't think of any. So find a dealer. I mean, or a very, very experienced collector who has the contacts. That would be my advice. And don't be put off or intimidated by, you know, I think maybe I'm a little bit intimidated to newcomers. I've people say to me, you're too expensive or whatever. Yes, I deal at the top end of the market, but that doesn't mean to say I'm not willing to help, guide, and advise. In fact, I would love to bring somebody along, you know, a new collector, even a new dealer, somebody who wants experience, somebody who's genuinely interested. I'd be happy to advise them. I mean, there are far too many Instagram dealers, you know, and that you never see at the fairs. I mean, that's what I was doing. I was going to all the fairs, speaking to all the dealers, picking up as many objects as I could, studying and learning. And so it's sad that you see people online, but you never see or meet them in person. I mean, I'm here. You know, people come and find me, and I'm happy to show you and teach you and tell you what I can.
Just before we move on to the last question, would you mind just telling those listening where they can find you and how they could get in contact? Because obviously, you're on Instagram as well, and you've obviously got your own website. Like, what are your socials, I guess, and what is the best way for people to get in touch?
Instagram, Runjeet.Singh, and Runjeet spelled the old way, RUNJEET. And I'm on Facebook, although I don't really use it too much for business. My own website, runjeetsingh.com. I exhibit in London every year around about October, end of October, early part of November. And so I have an exhibition coming up this October on New Bond Street in London, right next to Bonhams. And so you can come and see my exhibition and see me there. You know, my phone number's on my website, on Instagram. Send me a DM.
Yep.
Slip into my DMs, as they say. So
I've done it a few times.
Yeah, likewise.
No, definitely. Okay, so last question for the podcast anyway, which is, so this is a question I had in my head before we even had decided to do the podcast, and this is something that I think is perhaps a myth, but I'm hoping you can kind of enlighten me on it. So growing up, I was always under the impression and always told that Damascus steel, as you mentioned, is the pinnacle of metal for blades. And I was always told that it's a lost art. No one can do it. It's something that used to happen and it's just kind of disappeared from existence now. I obviously did a little bit of research before we did this podcast, and I've found that apparently it has been reproduced, but it's been reproduced by academics at Iowa University in the US. Now, I just wanted to get your perspective on Damascus steel. Well, first of all, can you actually create it today? And secondly, does it stack up on... I don't know whether you can do a direct comparison, but like, does it stack up to the Damascus that kind of seems to have built this massive reputation?
Up until, I don't know, 5 or 8 years ago, my answer was no, it can't be done. It hasn't been done. So just those who don't know Damascus steel, it's a myth to say that a lot of people believe that Damascus steel, or let's use the correct terminology, Woods or Foulard. So Woods or Foulard is folded like Japanese steel. Japanese blades are folded and hammered and folded and hammered. That is not Woods or Foulard steel. That is probably pattern welded steel, but that's something else. The way that Woods is made, or Foulard is made, is by taking iron ore, adding some carbon. It is actually a recipe. They add some leaves, they add some charcoal and a few other ingredients, and they seal it in a crucible, so like a airtight pot, and they seal it with clay, and it goes into the oven, and the temperatures that the ancient Indian ovens were creating with the use of bellows. So Indians invented the technology, the bellow technology, before Europe. So we were getting those temperatures really high, and it was creating this pure steel where it gets to such a temperature, it melts, and off come the impurities, which they call slag. And so at the end, you get a kind of a lump of very pure steel, which when hammered out, which when forged, and then treated with a coat of acid, brings up the pattern, that famous watering pattern. So that's how it's made. Up until about eight to 10 years ago, no, I don't think anybody knew how to do it. And there was some really naff kind of copies coming out of India. And then a TV personality and a friend of mine, Mike Lodes, this TV historian you probably heard of, Amar. He is very much into the military history side of things. Was commissioned by a member of the royal family in Jordan to research this, and the documentary's never made it to TV, sadly, but it is on YouTube.
I'm gonna go find that.
Yeah, if you type in Mike Lodes, I can't remember what it's called now, Woods, maybe even Damascus, you'll find this documentary, and they kind of solved the riddle, and it seemed to be all about where the iron ore was taken from. So the iron ore that was being used by the Indian fakers was, I don't know, just from anywhere, from any old quarry, but the iron ore from certain quarries had a very, very microscopic element called palladium, I think it was. And it was with that trace of an element that led to successful forging of wood steel. So I think maybe the Indians got hold of this documentary, or I don't know how they figured it out, but in recent years, Indian blacksmiths have been able to create what looks to be very convincing wood steel. And it's quite scary in terms of the fake market. So it makes, using a trusted dealer expert even more essential nowadays, because there is good steel coming out of India and it can be difficult to tell.
That's insane. We've got to the end of all of the questions that I had kind of wanted to get through. I just wanted to double check, is there anything that you wanted to mention or to go over before we wrap up this part?
No, I don't think so. Except to say, Ahmed, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the work you do and your patience with me over a year of waiting for me. And you've got the patience of a saint, as I said earlier. I don't know if I would have been so patient with me, but you were. So
No.
Thank you.
That's absolutely fine. No, thank you so much. All I can say is just thank you for taking the time to do this. I've thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation. I hope those listening have done too. But yeah, otherwise than that, I will leave you to the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks, Ahmed. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, man.
Okay.